Welcome everybody, and in this video I'm going to give you a very specific way that you can use natural light to improve your wildlife and nature photos, and you can do this with any camera. I think a lot of us, when we're photographing wildlife, we tend to shoot with both the subject and the background lit in the same way. Now this can be perfectly fine, you can get some great images this way, but there is a slightly different technique which I think improves the lighting and gives more eye-catching images. Now I've called this technique half and half lighting. It's just what I call it, what I came up with because it makes sense to me. So it works with some degree of sunlight, but the subject and the background are lit in a slightly different way. So I'm going to explain what I mean here. Your subject that you're photographing would be kind of in semi-shade. So if you imagine the bird or the animal that you're shooting, the light hasn't actually hit it yet, but the background is completely lit. And in these situations, you just get a really nice contrast, and it works very well with a telephoto lens where you can completely blur that background. So how do we do this in practice in the field? Well, I think it works really well close to sunrise and sunset under a clear sky. Now in the right situation and with the sun largely behind you, you should find that the light hits your background nicely, but it doesn't actually light up the subject. And it also helps if the background is a little bit higher than the wildlife subject that you're shooting. It gives quite an obvious separation in terms of light and colour, and it does give quite a contrast, but in a subtle kind of way, and I just think somehow it just seems to bring out the richness in the colours really well. I'm going to show you a couple of examples of this with small birds on perches, and this is where I had a feeding station for small birds a number of years ago now, and this situation was one where to the right hand side of me was a bit of a hillside. So early in the morning the sun would break, would come over there, and it would actually light the background that I was using in my pictures. So it would light that up beautifully first thing, but the sun wouldn't actually hit the feeding station and the perches for a little bit longer. So when I took these pictures at first, it was just by complete accident, and I thought it just gives such a nice quality of lighting, I just kept on doing it. Now there are degrees to this in terms of the strength of the light. I do think you're going to get the best effect within half an hour of sunrise, half an hour of sunset, possibly an hour. But if you take the morning, for example, once the sun starts to get higher in the sky and stronger, then your background becomes much brighter. The shadow areas, the subject is going to be in deeper shadow, so the contrast gets too much and you just lose that richness of colour as well. And similarly, if you were photographing much more in deep shade and your background was looking out kind of outside where it's brightly lit, and then that wouldn't work too well either. In that situation, you'd actually be better using a bit of fill-in flash. I did make a video on that. If you want to learn about the techniques of fill-in flash, then check the video in the description box below. And another benefit of this type of lighting technique, as well as the feel and the colour it gives to your images, is it can actually reduce the noise levels in your pictures. And that's because the background should be lighter in some way. Your background is kind of going to be overexposed to some degree, so that helps to cut down on the noise levels. So that's really useful to know if your camera struggles with higher ISOs and noise. And this is going to work even better if the background is a nice light colour such as yellow. Insects can be a really good candidate for this lighting effect, especially if you can find them roosting early in the morning, and that's because the sun is already going to be very low in the sky, making it easier to achieve this effect. Now this image I took of an azure damselfly, this was taken within half an hour of sunrise early on a summer's morning. The background here is actually very close, so it's not far away as it was with the birds. The light was coming from the left, slightly side lit, and the background was really nicely lit from the early morning sun, but the damselfly was still largely in the shade. And here I particularly like the contrast of the cooler blue of the damselfly and the warmer yellow from the background. In terms of exposure, it's not really an extreme exposure situation if the contrast is low enough. Now I'm always using evaluative metering on my camera, and in this type of situation I'd always add some overexposure from what the camera is telling me. So because the background is lighter, I think you need to do that, otherwise the subject in particular can just come out a little too underexposed. So as an estimate, I'd say go for +2/3, +1. There are situations where you might need to overexpose even more than that, and you should find that you've got a peak on your histogram if you want to look at the histogram. There should be a peak there for your background. I'd aim to have that somewhere to the right of the middle. And plants and flowers can work really well with this type of lighting as well. So if you want to isolate a flower head or maybe a group of flowers, you can do that in this way. Again, because the subject is going to be in some degree of shade, it'll help to preserve detail, but that colourful background will hopefully give it just a bit more pop. Now you could do this with a macro lens, which can really help to diffuse the background, or maybe even use a telephoto lens, possibly with extension tubes. So it's really just a case of trying to position yourself to get the best background, to get that lighting effect. With this type of photography as well, you may want to add a little bit more light into the shadow areas, particularly if it's lower down, with a reflector or possibly even an LED. And I think you could even do this with landscape photography to an extent, landscapes, maybe woodland photography. I think in this case it's going to be a little bit different because you're less likely to have a clear out of focus background for that lighting effect. It's more going to kind of be the surroundings. But in a similar way, I think you can use this separation of light and tone to enhance your images. And remember, you can do this with any camera. It's not about the gear, it's about recognizing quality of light and utilizing that to the best of your ability. So next time you're out and about near sunrise or sunset, have a look at the play of light, see how it's affecting things, look in the shadows, think, will this work, and give it a try. Now, if you've enjoyed this video and found it informative, then click on this video here, which is me talking about two of my favorite images from 2022, specifically related to the light, how they worked, why I like them so much, and how I took them. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.